Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we will look at the decision to rebuild a platform and how to manage expectations along the way. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 5,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, and curated Slack community and events like this one. So I'm Glyn Roberts. I'm emceeing today's Bytes section, and I'm the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. So the first panelist with me today is Fábio Oliveira, if I'm saying that correct, and Managing Director at YLD. So welcome, Fábio. Please give us a short introduction about yourself.
Thank you, Glyn. Really glad to be here. I'm Fábio, a ex-software engineer turned managing director over the years. Working at YLD, we are a consultancy specializing in helping our clients through digital transformation, through moving their platforms forward and building great products.
Excellent. Great to have you here. And the other panelist with us today is Jonathan Midgley, CTO at NewDay. So welcome, Jonathan. Could you also give us a short intro about yourself?
Of course, yeah. Hey, everybody. I am also a software engineer. I don't consider myself an ex-software engineer. I'd still like to hack a little bit of code if I can. I've been doing so now professionally for about 25 years. Prior to joining NewDay, I was director of engineering at Trainline, major replatforming, which is an interesting story there. And I've been at NewDay in my new gig for about 5 months.
Excellent. Well, great to have you two here. For the audience, please feel free to ask your questions at any time from the Ask a Question button just below the video. And we'll get to them throughout the fireside chat. So let's discuss rebuilding the platform. So I'll start off with you, Jonathan. As an organization, the conversation comes up saying, let's rebuild our platform. How do these conversations normally start, would you say?
A great question. Well, in my experience, they usually start with a strategic conversation. So what is it the business hopes to achieve? And those strategic conversations will ultimately filter down into a bunch of objectives, kind of very, very high level strategic objectives. So it might be that we'd like to internationalize. It might be that we'd like to trade some different products or expand our range of products, for example. Typically we'll look at that ask and we'll make an assessment of the current platform. Is it viable? Can we achieve those strategic goals using what we've got? If not, what does it look like? And often it looks like actually what we've got today won't allow us to go on that journey. So we need to start again.
Okay, wonderful. And Fábio, essentially with your involvement, how do you normally see these conversations starting?
Yeah, so obviously from our side, it's a different perspective from what Jonathan has. We come in as probably some of the enablers of this transformation. At the same time, how we usually look into it is try to separate the technological part, which is probably how most of the companies see these transformations going on, or rebuilds going on, more focused on the technology, which is important. It's a very important vertical of it. But also look at the impact it has in organization, and that can be in different areas. Some of the areas that sometimes go unnoticed, it's hiring. Is this new platform that we are building going to help you as the company hire better in the future? Sometimes this specific asks or this projects are more focused on, as Jonathan said, getting a new product out, internationalizing the brand, but how is that going to affect the organization in the long term? As I said, in terms of hiring, is the technology going to be viable 5-10 years down the line, or are we going to start thinking about rebuilding something again in 5, 6, 7 years time? So we tend to have that approach and just to give that holistic view of these are all the changes that need to be considered, and how can we move together towards that path.
So obviously the decision to do a rebuild, there's normally a very clear objective that you're trying to achieve with this. And obviously there's many different objectives there could be. So Fábio, what are the main concerns or risks that you would consider when you are looking at a rebuild?
So I've actually just mentioned a few. Technology, longevity. I think, and now going back to something I said before, and Jonathan picked on being a software engineer, we always look on for the new stuff, anything that it's shiny on the market. But sometimes it's easy to get carried away with how that will actually impact the organization in the future. So that's a level of consideration that some companies sometimes just get carried out with, or don't have into their plans, or don't consider it to their plans. So that's definitely a pitfall that we try to bring on board. Others is, as I also mentioned, the consideration in the culture and the hiring part of the company. Is doing this or changing technology completely going to help you in the future? Even if this is the right technology for it right now, are you going to be able to build up a team in the next 2-3 years that will be able to support this in the long term? Obviously, there are decisions that are made for the short term, but having the long term in view, it's one of the most important things. It sometimes gets overlooked, but still, it's something that we always have at heart whenever we have these conversations on trying to understand these different directions or parts of the platform rebuild.
Sure. I mean, one of the two big cons that always crop up in my mind is the time to value. Obviously, with a rebuild, there's a long period of time before you actually see value from your investment. And also the risk of not having a fully complete platform when you want to switch over. If there is anything missing that existed previously, then you have unhappy customers as well. So essentially, Jonathan, how do you go about finding the right answer for your business? What's the process for determining that is the right path to take against all the potential risks that can exist around it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Glyn. I think, there's no one size fits all here in my experience. It's very much about going on a journey with the business, bringing together the right stakeholders within the business, the commercial teams, finance, marketing, and of course, the technology teams, and ultimately tracking a course that will get you to the right place. But typically, so I'm going to talk to some personal experience. So I re-platformed or led in a re-platform at Trainline just before we IPO'd in 2019, and we made the decision to re-platform. But our time to value was kind of interesting, because ultimately we charted a course where we re-platformed iteratively, and we broke apart the legacy stack that we'd inherited that had been built out over about 20 years, and then we repurposed that into components wrapped in RESTful APIs, so we could really kind of chip away at that legacy platform whilst delivering on the new platform. And our ultimate goal was to internationalize the platform. So by the time we IPO'd, we'd gone from UK only to, I believe we were covering 47 countries, most of Europe and a few other countries. So it's not, I guess my point is, it's not necessarily a black or white thing. There's a solution which will be different for each and every business, where you chart a course between the old and the new.
Sure. So if you can break out into segmented services, as you just mentioned there, it does reduce the risk a lot, because obviously you can see your progress as you move forward. Yeah. I mean, Fábio, have you got any other thoughts around finding the right answer from this perspective?
No, as Jonathan said, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach to it. It's heavily dependent on the business, on the company goals, on the structure of it, and the involvement of key areas on it. I think, as I was saying before, that's actually one of the cons that I didn't mention before, on not getting the right people on board and looking at this type of projects as a technology-only approach, and a technology-only approach. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach, as I said, and it heavily depends on what the goals are, etc.
Sure. So just before we go into the actual process of defining a rebuild product, so Fábio, from like your view and your perspective, if you've got developers working inside a project and they're all complaining, saying, "Oh, it's spaghetti code, it's hard to test, it's hard to build," and then the organization determines that the value isn't there to do a full rebuild, how do you sell that into the engineering team? Because obviously they might be upset about the fact they're not able to push the technology forward from that perspective.
That's a very good question. As Jonathan said before, the strategy on how to do that and understanding what the end goal is the most important piece of it. If the project is solely to rebuild something with any sort of goals attached to it, obviously it becomes massively difficult to have a team engage on it or have the team be happy, as you were saying, Glyn, on engaging on this. What we usually see as and once more, there's no recipe for this, like or cookie cutter recipe for this, but what we usually see is the integration with the other side, with the client team. How does that work? Is that that cultural alignment where everyone is doing around the same piece of work, are focused on the same objectives? Can we get that in? And that's actually a central piece of any type of engagement that we do, is having that cultural alignment with the team, so it doesn't become like the example you just gave out, Glyn, of, well, there's code over here, now we need to do testing. This is very boring. We don't want to do this. What is the end goal of it? So just having that isolated piece really doesn't work out in the end, although it will produce something. But ultimately, the real value is the integration. How do you help the other side? In this case, our client team. How do we help them set up for the future in a better way?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a rebuild isn't decided upon, what can you do instead inside the engineering team to be able to improve life and at least go in the right direction, even if it's not a full clean rebuild? Okay, wonderful then. So Jonathan, so let's hypothetically then the decision to rebuild is actually been decided now from an organizational level. How do you sell this into the rest of the business? So obviously there's multiple parts. What's the approach? How do you get everyone on board?
Well, I'd hope that it was considered to be a journey. So if it was a surprise to the rest of the business that we suddenly decided to replatform, I think that would be a problem. So typically these things start off to referencing the earlier point that it starts with a strategic conversation, right? And that strategy is widely understood by the entire business. It's not just a few people working in a bubble. And ultimately, it's about taking, I believe, an agile view on execution, so making sure that we take baby steps and we take everybody on that journey all the way through to the end of the process, and really the agile model, in my experience, works super well. I'm thinking about things like show and tells. So show and tells, in my experience, are very powerful, not just throughout the delivery phase where we're saying, hey, look, we built this screen, or we've built this component, or we've got software engineers or product owners or designers talking about things, but it can also be very, very early in the process where we're talking about the journey we're embarking on, right? So why are we starting this journey? Why are we having these conversations? So lots and lots of very transparent, very lucid communication so that the rest of the business not only deeply understands why, how, where we're going, but they're bought into it, right?
Okay, great. So what about the culture piece then? Essentially making sure that, yes, they're bought into it, but they're also, you have the right people around you to make sure that that culture is going to fit that approach that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's super hard in my experience. So I'll talk to the experience at Trainline. So when I joined Trainline in 2016, I joined a team of around about 220 engineers. So it was a pretty big team. And we realized very quickly that, okay, we need to re-platform in order to reach those goals, right? In order to internationalize, in order to sell other products, we need to rebuild this thing, right? We went on a very typical agile discovery planning journey. And that told us that we needed to grow the team. And ultimately, we grew the team by about 100% very, very rapidly. So we ended up with about 450 software engineers, and that could have a hugely negative impact on the culture unless you're very, very careful, right? So as a software engineer, I know that I'm comfortable working with the people I'm used to working with. I'm a little bit OCD. I like all my things just so. I understand my domain, understand my code base, understand my goals. When all of that is in flux, people can get frustrated, unhappy, morale can start to drop. So again, I'd go back to that point about really taking everybody on the journey, focusing really, really hard on building, fostering, nurturing a culture in a very transparent way. So talking a lot about it. What is it we expect? What are the behaviors that we expect to see? What are the values that we should be aligned upon? And then, in my experience, investing a lot of my time at the beginning of that funnel. So bringing in the right people, making sure I'm working with the right partners who I know are aligned not only with my technical or my strategic goals, but my cultural goals. And I do that just by, personally, just by spending time with people, and I've got typically a really simple test, which is, I'll spend some time with a partner or with a potential recruits, and if I feel I want to continue that conversation, I'm disappointed when the conversation ends, then that's a great sign, right? We can probably work together.
Okay, great. I mean, from Fábio, from your side, seeing the other side of the engagement from this perspective, what's your view of how that works and how that engagement actually feels?
Yeah, so Jonathan touched on a very good point, which is the proximity to people, right? And just making sure that, and obviously we at YLD look at it from the point of view of someone that helps enable this transformations, these replatformings, rebuilds. And as I mentioned before, and Jonathan touched upon on this just now, it's building those close relationships that is very important. That just helps with everything. What you asked me about before, Glyn, on how do we entice the team, the engineering team or product team to be really into it and be into this project. And it's just having those close relationships, being really close. In our example, having offices across the UK and Portugal is just having those trips, those frequent trips that obviously didn't happen in the last year, but just having that proximity with just not within our team, but also the client teams, having those bridges being closed. It's really, really important. And then obviously just having the right alignment with the stakeholders and understanding that the choices that they are making are choices that we agree with, that these are areas of business that we ultimately want to collaborate on. If that alignment is not there, it's really, really hard to make anything work. From our perspective, of course, it will work for most business, but from our perspective, that's really, really hard because the alignment is key to anything we do. Having that alignment on board.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
I'll probably build on that just for a moment, if I may. So there's a sense that we risk alienating teams throughout some of these questions, right? And actually, my belief is that, so I believe in servant leadership, right? I'm not here to tell my teams how to do their job. I'm here to help them do their job, right? So I love that Steve Jobs quote that I don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. I hire them to tell me what to do. So ultimately, if there was a decision made to replatform, that decision wouldn't be made by me, right? That decision would be made by my team. So there's really no sudden kind of, light bulb, big bang moment where I stand up and say, hey, we're going to replatform. That would be kind of nuts. And I would have failed by that stage and I would have alienated a bunch of them and, people would be rightly pretty unhappy. So it's really, really important that we are completely transparent, especially the larger the organization gets, right? When you're working with engineering teams in the hundreds, there can be no secrets, right? And that's a learning, a personal learning, right? Just ultimate transparency.
Definitely. And just to keep adding on that, sorry, Glyn, keep adding on that from our perspective as well, we avoid being seen as the people that are gonna bring this change on board, and we are just, as I said before, the enablers of it, or just going to enable that to happen. So it's definitely not coming on board any new project or new client as well. Wildy will do this, or Wildy will make this possible. We always bring on board the collaboration, the integration with the teams, and enabling them to understand what the next steps might be. But at the same time, it's kind of putting what Jonathan just said about servant leadership, but in a more technology team focus of, we are here to help you. You guys need to tell us what you want to do. We have the expertise across many years of experience over our teams in different areas, in different verticals, different sectors to bring on board. But ultimately, we are here to help you. We need to understand from you what it is. We might add some to it. We might bring discussions up to the table to try to understand what the goals are, etc. But in the end, we are there as enablers and not as the makers. And I think that's a very important part of how we usually work with clients, how we work with clients, actually. We are the enablers of that change, but we are there to help them, not to drive that as the sole doers of it.
Yeah,
ultimately, we end up empowering the team.
That's what you're alluding to, a very, in my experience, a very broken model there, by the flip side to what you're saying, Fábio. So in the old world, and I'm old enough and grey enough to have practical experience of this, that kind of old view of outsourcing where we said, hey, we're going to build a thing, let's give it to those awesome dudes over in, I don't know, Ukraine or India. That just never works, right? We've learned the hard way, and I've certainly learned the hard way that doesn't work. And it's about building teams with various different members across different organizations and different contract types, from permanent to to freelancers to partners, etc., regardless of location, and creating one team that works super well together.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. The team augmentation approach, even from my view, definitely it needs to be there. Push it over the fence and wait for it to come back is never a good sign for success. Just keeping on the same topic though. So when you talk about servant leadership inside the engineering part of the organization, this is common and expected, and we do really well at empowering our teams.
Yeah.
But obviously you've got the issue of other areas of the organization, like the CEO, the CFO. I mean, what about the day-to-day priorities that are now taking over that work? So they go, well, the CFO still wants to see money coming into the account. So therefore, if we're investing more, he wants to see a higher income stream matching that investment, even though that as an organization, we've decided this is investment into our future. How do you manage that? How do you upwards manage or sideways manage to the rest of the organization when there are challenges around trying to prioritize things that aren't as important as this rebuild?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I love that. It's one of my favorite topics, actually, because it's super important. We constantly deliver value. So I'll hark back to Agile, right? One of the things that I love most about Agile is I'm constantly showing what I'm doing. Each individual is, each team is, I am, right? So I'm constantly delivering value, and I believe deeply in delivering that value to customers as quickly as possible. If we build a thing and then put it on the shelf for 2 months, then bad things start to happen. We've got to build a thing and get it to customers quickly. And our strategic goals should also accommodate our short-term revenue goals, right? So, and that's super important. So that transparency, that openness, that inclusivity of conversation includes the chief exec, of course, and the CFO, of course, the marketing director. So we're all aligned on this, right? So we're going to re-platform. We're also going to increase revenue. So at Trainline, we went on a re-platforming journey for about 3 years. We scaled out from 1 to 47 countries. We grew the business. We grew our revenue by 133% year on year. We started retailing not only train tickets, but bus tickets and insurance and various other things. So you can tread a course where you re-platform whilst continuing to grow.
Okay, so as long as an organization can have that clear path in front of them, then there's no complaints from other aspects of the organization.
I wouldn't say there were no complaints, but yeah, let's
less issues,
less complaints.
But that comes from the strategic piece that Jonathan was mentioning right at the beginning, right? If that is in place, and it needs to be in place, then that buy-in from different stakeholders in the business should be there and shouldn't even be discussed. But it's when that isn't aligned from the get-go that things get more complicated.
Yeah.
Talking from experience, we I actually had a situation a couple of years ago where a client, developing an app, and I'm trying not to give out too much information on this, but developing an app, they were having, as I mentioned before, problems hiring, huge backlog, and they obviously want a team augmentation engagement. And we came up with a strategic plan for them that would actually be a replatforming that will allow them to be able to hire better in the future, but to keep delivering value. Ultimately, stakeholders didn't understand the upside of that, and it didn't turn out to nothing. So this example, just to press on again on the strategic importance, or the importance of the strategic piece whenever anything happens. If that isn't there, it becomes very difficult, and then it turns into something that I was talking about in the beginning, where it's just a technology piece and not a business impact piece. Yeah. And we tend to just focus on the tech side, but it's so much more. It's driving revenue, as Jonathan was saying, and delivering value constantly and showing that value being delivered. It can be revenue, it can be so many other metrics, but if that isn't in place, and by that I mean the strategic piece from day one, when this is thought of, it gets really, really complicated to take this on a successful journey.
And as you're constantly delivering value, lots of other great things start to happen. So one of them is confidence. So confidence grows across the wider business because you're showing the teams, the board, the investors, everybody that, look, we promised to make the thing. We've made the thing, right? Now we're going to go and make another thing. And then you show them the next thing. In my experience, it's very unlikely when you're doing a major replatforming, to the scale of the work we're doing at NewDay or at Trainline, when we're spending, many tens of millions of pounds, that an investor's going to say, yeah, there's the cash, go on, you go for it. We'll see you in a year. That ain't going to happen, right? What they're going to want to see is that you've spent a small proportion of that, you've delivered against your promises, and then the next tranche of cash will become available. So it's that constant iteration, delivery of value across the whole estate, demonstrating that we're giving a return on investment right from the beginning of the initiative.
Sure. I mean, what you are referencing there is larger organizations. I think with smaller organizations that have only got an MVP, then it's a different circumstance, because maybe it's so in fact, this ties into a few of the questions that we've got from the audience. So we might as well start digging into those now, actually, while we're touching on them. So one of the first questions we got, which I think is quite interesting, is just definition of terms. So rebuild, replatform, retransform, and reimage the product. What would you say is the definition or differences between these types of phrases?
I don't know, is the honest part. I've never heard of half of them. Reimage, I don't know what that is, or retransform, like transforming the transformation. But look, I'm joking really, but ultimately, rebuild and replatform, I think, are the same thing. So it's very rare, though, in my experience, even with an MVP in a small business. And look, I've been CTO of lots of little startups, where I've built the first MVP personally myself. It's very rare that you'd ever just chuck it away and start again. If you were going to do that, you should probably ask yourself some pretty basic questions. And I think, typically what we'll do is we'll pivot in some way, and we'll say, okay, look, we need to go in a different direction. The thing that we've built would have been built properly, would have been architected in a way that allowed us to do so, because that's the way businesses evolve. If it was tightly coupled, if it was a monolith, for example, that would be hard, typically. But if it was a series of components that were loosely coupled all the way through the stack, then it's much easier to take those apart and repurpose them in interesting ways. So I think actually maybe the first 2 points, rebuild versus replatform, I think replatform is probably implies the latter. Look, we've got a series of components here that we can repurpose and allow us to pivot. Rebuild implies, okay, what we've done here is built something that's not fit for purpose, and we need to start again.
Okay.
Which is kind of the same thing for retransform, I guess, where it's probably where you pivot and then you pivot again and probably just pivot again just to try to find the right model. Or just try to find the right implementation that you're seeking. And reimage is just, I think it says in parentheses right after, it's just you have something and you're just going to change how it looks, but more from visual perspective than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility, though, as technology leaders to accommodate change, right? So, I've talked a lot about agile, which is something that I believe in deeply. And, I started my career as a professional software engineer in the world of waterfall, literally in financial services. I had a room of very smart BAs next to me. I was in the software engineering room, and next to me was a room of QAs. And that always ended really badly, right? So it's our responsibility. It's my responsibility to build platforms that can be easily repurposed, easily scaled, that we could change course, we could pivot without having to re-platform or rebuild. So the re-platformings that I've been part of have always been taking a platform that wasn't fit for purpose, that had been built over a long period, using techniques that were applicable at the time, but no longer so. So the Trainline platform that I'd inherited in 2016 had been built in a time before microservices were a thing, right? It was a tightly coupled monolith with an Oracle database at the heart, stuffed full of business logic. It was just it was a software engineer's nightmare.
Okay, great. So just touching quickly back on like the smaller startup piece. So one of the questions is any experiences of taking a no code / low code MVP to something else. So this is the phrase, this is the place where you may create a quick WordPress blog with some plugins that, does what you need, validates the market. And now you need to move to the next step. And the next step is moving away from WordPress. What any experiences, maybe probably Fábio would have probably touched on a few cases like this a little bit more in the past.
Can you just ask the question again? Because I don't see it in the QA box.
Oh, no. Sorry, yeah, it's in. It's just this one here. It's any experience of taking a no-code or a low-code MVP to something else.
So at Wildy, we usually work with companies that are larger, but essentially something that we've done in the past is also help some what I'll call smaller companies, but startups or even scale-ups moving their MVP forward. But I think I'll always come back to this is what is the goal in this transformation? What is the goal of taking this, as it is in the question, this no-code or low-code MVP to something else? What are we trying to do for the future? Obviously, the MVP serves a purpose. Getting funding, etc., just proving that there is a product there. But what are the next steps that need to be done? How much impact does it need to have? What type of platform are we trying to build? So these are more the questions that need to be asked rather than the actual experience. Like, are the answers to those questions in place? Can they be answered? If yes, I would go as far as saying it's not as different from a Trainline, NewDay, Economist, Condé Nast running a replatform project. It's just on a different scale. Yeah. But it's just going back to the strategic piece. Like, what's the strategy behind this? Like, what are we trying to do here? We have this MVP. We proved the concept. What are the next steps? How can we help you move forward? But the only thing that changes is the scale. Instead of the actual type of engagement.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think my instinct would be that you've iterated out an MVP, as Glyn said. Using WordPress, some plugins, maybe a little bit of PHP's been hacked in there, whatever, right? So you've got some goals. You've pivoted and twisted, and you've now got a clear objective. I think honestly, you've got to make a tough decision at some point. And by the way, I've been on this journey myself. I haven't only worked in large organizations. I've worked in and owned smaller companies. And you've got to make a tough decision sometimes just to say, okay, the MVP's done what we need it to do. Its days are numbered, right? We're now going to do this. We're now going to do this from first principles and build it properly. We've learned what we needed to do from the MVP. We've learned about our audience. We've got product market fit. Okay, let's bring in some engineers. Let's build this thing.
Okay, great. And then just a smaller question. Essentially, have any of you had any success with code conversion tools when transforming legacy tech stacks? So obviously, maybe Jonathan with his grey hairs, with experience of dealing with very legacy systems. I mean, have any of you two ever come across trying to utilize any of these code conversion tools and actually working?
No, I'd much prefer humans, honestly. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be pretty well funded, and ultimately, if I was to give a conversion to a tool, what would ownership look like moving forwards of a complex deliverable? I guess it's kind of back to that empowered teams thing. I'd much rather give a team the problem to solve and the support they needed to do so they could build the thing in their vision and then own that for the medium to long term.
And look, ultimately, we need to ask the question of, is doing this code conversion really what we want? Jonathan touched on, when we were talking about the MVPs, WordPress, PHP acting there, or any other technologies. Do we really need to change that? Or does that serve the purpose? And what we just want is to bring that to scale. And then, yes, we can get into a conversation of, is this the right tool for the job? Or is this the right language or right platform from the job? But once more, as a software engineer, I know we are always eager on trying new stuff and hacking stuff together. But from a business perspective, is sometimes even the boring choices might be the correct ones. It's just, once more, understanding what is the path forward. So going to this code conversion bit, obviously, if we're talking about converting a legacy tech stack, as it says so in the question, yes, human interaction is of the essence for everything that Jonathan said. But once more, the question is this really something that we want to do? Is this the recipe that we want to follow? What are the business cases to do this? And some of the questions that sometimes are left unanswered.
Okay, great. We're getting loads of questions coming through, guys, so I think we're going to be here all day. But obviously, we've got limited time. So my next question, essentially, rebuilding a platform that delivers equal or more value than the previous platform obviously takes time and investment. Do you have examples of the way you kept investment coming into the rebuild, i.e. quarterly goals and outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on this earlier. Agile, right? So deliver value. No investor worth their salt is going to give you a significant chunk of cash, millions of pounds to do a thing and then just disappear off and return and go, yeah, done it. That would be very unlikely. What they will expect is that you take a tranche of the cash, you deliver some value, then you get some more. So you're constantly demonstrating ROI, but then there's kind of a step further there where you got to, in my experience, try and plot a course where you can re-platform whilst increasing everything, right? So increasing our cost effectiveness, increasing our revenue and our profitability, increasing morale, improving culture, etc., etc. There's a great opportunity with a re-platforming to do all of those things in parallel right from the very beginning.
Okay, so what you're saying is I will get back to you in just 1 minute, Fábio. So what you're saying, Jonathan, is that when you make the decision to re-platform, you have no confirmation that you got the full budget. You're literally taking it on pure faith that you know that you can deliver a platform and start moving in this direction, and that you'll still be able to keep the budget numbers aligned for more investments to come through.
100%. So, I for the last almost 10 years, I've worked in private equity, right? So, they would never give me a considerable sum of money. What they would expect is that I prove that I can do what I've promised to do, and then I continually do that. And that's the journey you need to go on. You need to take the team and the investors on. Okay,
sorry, Fábio, carry on.
Now, I was just going to mention that there's a couple of questions from before that are actually around this, from John and Andre, I think, around the replatform and how to drive performance improvements for team members, but also how to publish new features into both platforms. So the old platform, the legacy platform, and the new one, which I think Jonathan touched upon in his answer just now.
Sure. I mean, essentially, Yeah, my next question, like from Simone, is very similarly aligned. How do you measure progress on replatforming? So milestone based, or do you try and prove that every milestone directly adds value? What is the outcome, speed, autonomy? How do you measure this?
Yeah. So yes to all of that. So that's the challenge to the team, right? And in the spirit of bottom up, it's a negotiation. It's not the business saying to the team, "Hey, deliver the thing by the 1st of January." That would be kind of nuts, right? It's like, okay, we've got these objectives and these strategic goals to hit. How are we going to do that, right? And that's when magic starts to happen, because teams will solve problems in unexpected ways. That's why, in my experience, autocratic, organizations often fail. Once we put groups of smart people together with a very clearly defined set of objectives, they will solve for those objectives in ways that we couldn't have possibly foreseen. And of course, some of the constraints that we will ask them to adhere to are constraints of quality, of speed, of performance, of value, of time, these are your milestones, etc.
Okay, great. The questions are still coming in hot and fast. So we'll just carry on just going through those then. So essentially, one of them from Daniel is we're planning on replatforming in the same way that you mentioned, replacing the huge monolithic systems piece by piece.
Yeah.
How should the product team feed into this process effectively? The tech team understands what the product needs to do today. So how do you balance new features against delivering core functionality?
That's an awesome question. I love that. So I'd probably just pick up on the phrase feed into. I wouldn't have them feed into it. I'd have them deeply involved in it. They should be at the heart of it, right? They own this thing, not the tech teams. If you've got a tech teams owning it, man, you're going to struggle with that. Give the product teams the responsibility for all the things, everything, from performance through delivery, from quality through security. Because remember, the product teams ultimately represent the customer and they own the backlog. So start right from the very beginning with the product teams driving discovery, post-its on whiteboards, articulating the requirements, working together as a unit. And ultimately, you'll then find, in my experience, that you get that full transparency, clarity, and ownership all the way across the board.
Wonderful. Okay, then next one. So essentially, how would you approach moving from a single tenanted model to a multi-tenanted SaaS model? Would you stop? Yeah, when would be the period you'd stop investing in the previous platform?
Fábio, you want to go?
And I was just thinking about something that's probably close to you right now, which I think it's what you guys have. So go for it.
Yeah, so that's my challenge today, right? So I've joined a business which is pivoting from being a very traditional, very successful financial services business into a fintech, and I've inherited a platform which is fantastic, but it's single tenant. So we deliver bespoke solutions for each of our partners, and my challenge is to deliver a multi-tenant solution. But again, I'm going to sound boring in a minute, if not already. But I'm not going to take a big bang approach to it and say, "Oh, I've done it." A year later, what I'm going to do is deliver iterative value, and I'm going to break the single tenant platforms down into components. So I'm going to rebuild them and put them back together to deliver a multi-tenant solution. And that won't be that I'll suddenly say, "Hey, we're now multi-tenant." It will be that some of those components will be multi-tenant. One component to start with, and then two, and then five, and then so on. So we're iterating towards the final solution.
Okay, and this next question follows on exactly with that. So what are your thoughts on some teams being involved in replatforming and some teams continuing product delivery? And essentially that is, in short, what you're saying you're doing there by having some teams building the new services and some obviously continuing with the day-to-day pieces, I assume.
No, actually. What I've found with that approach is that it can alienate some teams. So there's a perception, right or wrong, that working on the new stuff is way cooler, right? Because it's the new stuff. Working on the old stuff is, who wants to work on that? And that creates a kind of us and them culture. So you got to find the right balance between that. So giving the teams a a piece of the new thing to own is really powerful. And then you're also protecting the future, because what you don't want is siloed knowledge. What you don't want is some teams who only know the legacy platform and some teams who know the new platform. That creates risk. So it sounds kind of complex, but in my experience, you can tread a line between the two, so that all of the teams have a piece of the action.
Yeah, it's just going back on those values of transparency and bringing the whole team together over a single objective, and them understanding what are the goals that need to be taken and being involved in that journey, which is it's key. If you just start to segment, as Jonathan was saying, once upon a time or once down the line, actually, the new platform will be the legacy platform, and you're back on square one with the same exact problems and fragmented knowledge, etc. So you want to avoid that from day one.
An interesting approach, which is the approach that I take generally, is that we break. So I'm going to talk to the monolith, because that's probably the most extreme example, and maybe the scariest. So we take the monolith first of all, and we break it apart into components, and those components have owners, right? And they have owning teams, and we try and group them in a sensible way. So it might be that we have teams that own our apps, and we have teams that own our web channels, and teams that own a group of back-end services. Those teams would also be challenged with building the components for the new platform. And in the short term, it might be about repurposing the legacy components and gradually chipping away at them to deliver the components for the new platform. And what you have then is you have a bunch of teams that have ownership. So when you get to the end of the journey, that we've done it, we've achieved our goal. You've got complete ownership across the organization. Lots of very, very bought in, very, very passionate teams.
Okay. I mean, do you have to worry about integration between the two sides? Because obviously, if you're going from monolith into like service-based approach, then obviously you have APIs and contracts and everything like that. Obviously, keeping that alignment when you do have separate teams owning separate part of the product, do you see challenges from that standpoint?
Yeah, it's this isn't easy, but you mentioned contracts. It's about ensuring that the teams are in dialogue, and we've got a standardized approach to interacting between components. This is it's a very mature, very well proven microservice model, right? And ultimately, that's the beginning of the journey. Is we take a look at a monolith, we work together to say, okay, this is how we're going to break this thing apart. These are how the components are going to talk to each other, and then we agree on those contracts. And then we adhere to them, or we iterate on them in partnership.
I mean, essentially, the next question lines up nicely into the previous one as well. So how do you manage to keep in balance newly requested features and having them available in both? So I assume, obviously, by having the product separated into its own units, the new features would go into both the old code base and the new code base if they are getting ran in parallel or built in parallel.
Or maybe not. I mean, that certainly would solve the problem, but you're then continuing with two divergent code bases, right? In a perfect world, once you've got to the point you've broken the monolith apart, you would work out how to deliver the new functionality whilst adhering to the new platform vision. And that's hard, right? That can obviously often involve compromise. The creation of significant debt, which needs to be logged appropriately and prioritized at the right time in the backlog.
So would you say that if a team is in charge of X part of the application and they're building a new part, is there a time limit of how quickly they need to build that new part, otherwise of the divergence of the two feature sets, for example? Yeah,
I would say so. I think that would be on them to work out. Remember that they've been challenged with a set of objectives, strategic objectives that they're working hard to meet. And some of those objectives would probably be, I hope, cost related. So running two platforms, a monolith and a bunch of microservices in parallel would be hugely expensive, right? Maybe prohibitively expensive. So you've got to chart a course where you're slicing off and deprecating that that monolith. So you're reducing the cost whilst investing in the new platform. So really that drives the team to focus on delivering any new functionality using the new model.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Jonathan just touched on the right words of slicing it up and understanding how do you start that transformation or that translation piece to the new platform. You can't do it all at once, so you just need to hack it away and start building upon that, and just ensure that that transition is as smooth as possible from different point of views that Jonathan mentioned: cost, effort, time, etc.
Okay. And if the reason, so another one of the audience questions, if the reason for replatforming is to achieve scale, what are the key concepts and tools like cloud storage that are the way to go, would you be recommending?
Yeah, cloud, obviously. Well, you know, it's kind of an argument that's been had. Cloud, right? It's like saying, hey, we're gonna be agile or waterfall. We know, right, that we're going to be agile. But in order to achieve scale, we need to deliver a solution that is componentized throughout the stack, in my experience, i.e. all the way through from the piece the customer interacts with all the way down to the database. And you know, obvious stuff about microservices. You know, the basic principle is that I can take this microservice and I can swap it out with a new microservice. I can iterate it at will, and extend and adapt it very, very quickly. And that implies scale. And also microservices lend themselves very, very well to scaling in the cloud. So we discover that a bunch of services are in high demand. You know, they're expensive. We can architect them in an appropriate way to be as cost effective as possible.
Great.
And at the same time, don't forget about something that Jonathan and I mentioned right at the beginning, which is that most of these projects or endeavors are much more than technology. So focusing just on key concepts and tools for this type of projects might not be, I'm not going to say the right way to go, but it's just looking at a small part of it. There's so much more into it. Like, can you attract, imagine that you go with a certain cloud provider for something, and then you go to the market to find people that can actually help you with that. And you can't attract anyone, or you don't have the budget for it to attract the right type of people. Those are things that need to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, as I said before, you're going to be doing a replatforming 1 or 2 years down the line to try to align to something that you can actually do. So tech is a part of it, but it isn't all. It needs to be looked at in a very holistic way.
Yeah, I'd also mention cloud native. So at Trainline, we were AWS. At NewDay, we are Azure. And my advice is to leverage as much as you possibly can cloud native functionality. It's hugely powerful and very, very cost effective. And as Fábio said, you know, if you focus on the right cloud provider for you, and also think very long and hard about how you're gonna resource that team, then you can get to the right place. So you make the right decision about provider. You focus on optimizing for cloud native and availability of resource.
Great. Okay, then. So this is hopefully a small one. We're leaning into service-orientated architecture over microservices. Do either of you two have a preference of which way you go?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it heavily depends. Without just as it is, it's really hard to say what's the right choice. But I think if we're talking down to personal preference, I would say you might see from the whole conversation that, and I'll talk for Jonathan in this one, that microservices would be the preferred approach, but it's really hard to say without any what's the context.
We've got people asking the difference. Yeah.
Pedro and Simone, I'm not sure I know what the difference is, honestly, but I would say that maybe microservices are a subset of SOA or the other way around. So ultimately what we're doing is we're taking a thing and breaking it down into pieces and allowing those pieces to interact with each other. It's conceptually pretty simple.
I believe you can still run an SOA solution in like a monolith. Essentially, you just define its separation inside the code, where obviously it's a microservice, there are its own separate code entities, essentially, from that perspective. Though I could be completely wrong with that. So that's just my assumption. Okay, the last one's a fun one. You talked a lot about successful rebuilding. Anything you've learned from failures? We'll start off with Jonathan, and then we'll let Fábio join in.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've failed more times than I can possibly remember. And they were all hard and painful. I've set up businesses that have lost, small fortunes and gone away, licked my wounds and, come back to the battlefield. And that is the ultimate learning, I think, is that we have to fail. Fail fast is something that I hold pretty close to my heart, and it's on us as technology leaders to build an environment that allows that to happen, which isn't always the case, by the way. I've early in my career worked in environments where failure was frowned upon, and that creates a very toxic culture. So I try very hard to accommodate failure. In fact, to encourage failure and to do that in a very, very transparent way. I talked about show and tells. I love it when a young software engineer comes along to a show and tell and say, I did this thing, didn't work out. That's awesome. Because then everybody else knows how not to do that, right? We've learned something really powerful.
And Fábio?
Yeah, from my point of view, I'll just offer two views. One personal, the other one from YLD side, as a company that helps other companies in the market. So from a personal side, as a software engineer, I've been through many projects where things didn't work out, and as Jonathan just said, just builds up experience, and you understand all the minute details that you're going to use in the future, or that you're gonna help you drive conversations in the future. I think that's the most important part. In terms of actually failing, yes, it's something that I don't think anyone likes to do it, but it's something that you actually need to do it. And once it happens, you understand how important it is for you and for your progression and for your development. Now, looking at from the YLD side, it's complicated, right? What we do is help companies not fail at what they're doing. And what we do for that is bring the whole experience from everyone that is involved with YLD, from other experiences from both in their professional lives and while at YLD, and bring those on board to help and to bring that knowledge on board. Hence why throughout this lovely chat of ours over the last hour, I've touched on stuff like alignment with culture, being close to people, being mindful of business choices. So it's taking those examples throughout all of the experiences from people at YLD and putting them together for this new engagement that we have, be it with client A, B, or C, and understanding what are the key drivers, trying to identify. It's really hard to say from day one that, well, this is not going to work, this is going to fail. No one knows. It would be great to, meaning that I could just play the lottery and cash out. But in the end, is bringing all of that knowledge accumulated from years and years and years of experience from many different people, and helping everyone avoid that failure, but at the same time teaching and making examples available to everyone.
Okay, great. So if we just sum up now, just like a minute each, just to quickly go, what are the key things to look out for when you are considering rebuilding the platform and how you execute it? Jonathan?
The key things, well, I think that I've talked about strategy, ensuring that we have clarity and transparency across the organization, focus on fostering a really healthy, open culture that accommodates failure, and really please deliver iteratively. Never disappear off and make the thing. Take small, tiny, weeny baby steps towards the goal, and take all these stakeholders on a journey with you, and you stand a much better chance, in my experience, of succeeding.
Great. Fábio?
Definitely. I'll just add to that, understand your business goals and the business goals behind it. We touched upon earlier that this can be applied to startups of 2-3 people to massive corporations of thousands of people. The end goal should remain the same, no matter what the scale is, the approach might be different. But if you understand the business goals for that transformation, you are closer to ensuring the success of it.
Excellent. Right then. So we should probably wrap it all up. So thank you to Fábio and Jonathan for talking with us today. It's been excellent to have you on. You can connect with our speakers after this event on the links in the chat I've just shared. Here's their LinkedIn. Also, next week's Bytes event is on recruiting and retaining diverse tech talent. So I hope to see you all there next Friday. Thank you all for joining, and have a great week. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.